Hey guys, tonight we ease ourselves into a story filled with fire, silence, stubborn courage, and just the right amount of absurdity. You are here lying in bed, probably adjusting your blanket, and in your mind's eye you're transported back to the 13th century. The night is heavy, the air smells faintly of wood smoke, and distant drums echo across a kingdom that looks deceptively calm. Except it isn't calm at all. A storm is coming. You can almost taste the tension, like the metallic tang of rain before it falls. The Mongol Empire. Yes, the same sprawling empire that once made almost every medieval king and queen nervously chew their nails, is about to try again. You may recall, they already showed up once before, 27 years earlier, and they left disappointed. Empires hate disappointment. It gives them indigestion. So now, in the year 1285, Kublai Khan, grandson of the great Genghis, decides it's time to pack his saddlebags, whistle for his generals, and send an army south into Vietnam once more. And here's the reality check. You probably would have this. Even before a sword was drawn, you'd be undone by the humidity alone. Your medieval Fitbit would scream at you as you trudged through sticky rice paddies, while professional warriors on horseback galloped past like it was a Sunday stroll. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fun to see night owls, early birds, and insomniacs from every corner of the planet. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step with me into a world balanced between rice fields and royal palaces, monks chanting in pagodas and merchants closing their stalls early because rumors swirl through the streets. The Mongols are coming. They are coming not in dozens or hundreds, but in waves so vast they might as well blot out the horizon. Chroniclers of the time say 500,000 men were gathered for this grand push. Historians still argue whether that number is wildly inflated or not, but even if it was half that size, the image is still dizzying. Ranks of horse archers, heavy infantry, Chinese auxiliaries, and supply trains stretching longer than your patience during airport security. Meanwhile, Vietnam, then known as Đại Việt, wasn't exactly sprawling. Imagine a slender kingdom hugged by the South China Sea, streaked with rivers, punctuated by mountains, and defended by people who knew their land intimately. The ruling Trần dynasty was young, proud, and maybe just a little anxious. Because how do you stare down the Mongols, whose empire reached from Siberia to Syria, and not feel your pulse racing? You might picture Kublai Khan himself. He wasn't riding in personally, of course. He had imperial affairs to manage from Beijing. But his ambition stretched all the way here, tugging the strings. He wanted Đại Việt subdued, both as a political statement and a logistical necessity. An obedient Vietnam would grease the gears of further campaigns against Java and beyond. To him, it was just another square on the imperial chessboard. To you, standing in the rice stubble at dusk, it's your entire world. Here's where the story gets almost soothing in its predictability. The Mongols plan to come down with overwhelming force, and the Vietnamese plan to survive with cunning. You can already guess the tone. Patience versus power, guerrilla shadows versus thunderous cavalry charges. Let's pause for a quirky tidbit. Some contemporary sources describe how Mongol horses struggled with the damp, swampy environment. Hooves designed for dry steppe plains now squelched in mud like sneakers on a rainy soccer field. Supposedly, some soldiers tried wrapping cloth around the hooves to prevent infections. Imagine being a fierce warrior of the steppes, reduced to horseshoe babysitting. It's like Superman being slowed down by wet socks. Now, picture yourself inside the royal palace of Thăng Long, the medieval forerunner of Hanoi. The hall is lit with oil lamps. Courtiers' bowels stand rigid, and the king, Trun tries to keep a serene expression while secretly calculating how many weeks of rice stores are left. You can sense the quiet dread here. Because yes, Đại Việt had survived before, but the Mongols had learned too. This time they came bigger, broader, with allies like the Kingdom of Champa nudged into cooperation. You drift down the palace corridors, listening to whispers. A scribe murmurs that the Mongols are marching along two fronts, one pressing down from Yunnan, the other sweeping in from Guangxi. Another mutters that the invaders have already taken key mountain passes. Somewhere in the courtyard, a drummer practices a rhythm, slow and steady, like a heartbeat reminding everyone to stay calm. And here's one of those open, scholarly debates. Was the Mongol plan really to conquer and occupy, or was it to smash quickly, collect tribute, and move on? Some historians argue it was more about face and prestige than about building a long-term colony. Others insist the empire's logistical commitment shows they wanted a firm grip. You, of course, just know one thing. You'd rather not be in the middle of it either way. As night falls, you wander out into the countryside. Fireflies spark above waterlogged paddies, and frogs croak with the urgency of monks chanting mantras. Farmers gather their belongings quietly, preparing to leave their villages empty. A whole nation is holding its breath, like a giant audience waiting for the curtain to rise. Except when it rises, the cast is a little terrifying. Horse archers with composite bows, siege engineers with towers, and generals with reputations sharp enough to slice through morale. Still, there's an odd calm in the air. You know something the Mongols don't. The Vietnamese have no intention of meeting them head-on. Instead, the kingdom will retreat, lure, starve, and frustrate. Already, caches of food are being hidden, boats prepared for hit-and-run strikes, and even temples are quietly mobilizing supplies. You stand by the river and hear the splash of paddles in the dark. Plans are in motion. And just when you think the tension is unbearable, there's a tiny comic relief. Picture a Mongol scout tripping into a flooded paddy field, armor clanking, sputtering muddy water while a local fisherman watches silently from the shadows. History may be brutal, but it's also full of these awkward human moments, like blooper reels hidden between the grand battles. So here you are, on the eve of one of Southeast Asia's great defensive wars. The Empire of Empires is knocking again, with banners fluttering and drums pounding. Yet Vietnam waits with patience, cunning, and a quiet confidence born from knowing its land better than any outsider ever could. You curl deeper under your blanket, safe in the present day, while in your imagination the storm clouds gather. You feel the next morning dawn on the kingdom like a low hum. The mist hangs thick over the river, wrapping wooden boats in gauze, and every sound seems muffled, as if nature itself is hesitant about what comes next. Inside the Trun royal court, though, there is no hesitation, only anxious murmurs, whispered arguments, and the occasional clatter of a teacup hitting a saucer a little too hard. You slide into the room, ghost-like, listening as the weight of empire presses down on these men and women. The Trun dynasty is barely 3 generations old, a youthful line compared to other houses across Asia. Their throne room is not a sprawling Versailles, but a practical space, polished wood, stone floors, and banners painted with dragons. The king, Trun sits there, his posture upright but his eyes betraying exhaustion. To one side is the retired emperor, Trun Tong, whose presence is like a quiet lighthouse. The man stepped down formally but still radiates authority. You can tell who really gives the pep talks in the evenings. All around, ministers and generals debate. The voices rise and fall like a tide. One insists the kingdom should submit, pay tribute, and avoid bloodshed. Another argues that surrender would mean humiliation, endless demands, and perhaps eventual annexation anyway. You, listening from the corner, might be tempted to pull out popcorn if only you weren't half terrified for them. And of course, the Mongols aren't just sending an army. They've done their diplomatic homework. Letters demanding submission arrive, sealed with imperial authority, and they're not exactly polite. Imagine a message written in bold font that basically says, "Join us or else." Courtiers glance at one another nervously. The or else part has already been demonstrated across Asia. Yet here's where the fragility of the kingdom feels oddly steady. Because despite fear, there's also pride. These rulers remember that their fathers had already fought the Mongols once and lived to tell the tale. They know the swamps, the rivers, the humid heat, all things their enemies underestimate. So as the debate flows on, you sense not only dread, but also sparks of defiance flickering like candles in a drafty hall. Now a quirky tidbit. Some records describe how, in these council meetings, attendants would fan the air constantly, not just for comfort, but to waft away mosquitoes. Can you imagine trying to discuss survival strategies against the world's most terrifying empire, while also slapping your ankles to keep from being bitten? That's multitasking at its most medieval. Meanwhile, outside the court, the city of Thanglong hums with nervous energy. Markets are half full, sellers whisper rumors as much as they sell fish. A woman lays out silk at her stall, only to pack it back up when a friend tells her the Mongols are just a few weeks away. Children chase each other in the dusty streets, but their laughter sounds thinner than usual, like it knows it shouldn't be too loud. Back in the palace, the generals confer. You lean closer to hear a name repeated with weight. Trần Hưng Đạo. He isn't just another commander. He's the bulwark, the strategist, the man whose presence steadies an entire dynasty. His ideas are practical. Don't waste lives in hopeless battles. Retreat when needed. Save strength for when the enemy is weakest. His calmness contrasts beautifully with the panicked rustle of ministers' robes. But here's an open scholarly debate. Some historians argue the Trần rulers were genuinely torn between resistance and capitulation, while others claim the court never seriously considered surrender. It was simply a ritual of weighing options, a way to reassure themselves before choosing the path they already knew. You might find yourself smiling at the thought. Even in the 13th century, people still liked to stage meetings that could have been emails. As the day wears on, torches are lit, shadows lengthen, and decisions loom. You feel the tension building like static before lightning. Trần Tông looks at his father, then at his generals, then back at the court. His voice is calm but deliberate. They will resist. They will trust their people, their terrain, and their wits. The room exhales at once, like a chorus that has been holding its breath for hours. You wander outside again. Night has fallen, but the city doesn't sleep. Blacksmiths hammer quietly in back alleys, producing arrowheads by the glow of embers. Monks chant in temples, their prayers weaving into the smoky air. Farmers from nearby villages arrive with carts, offering rice to be stored away. It is as though the entire kingdom is moving in rhythm to the same quiet drumbeat. And still, that fragility remains. You sense it in the way people glance at the horizon, wondering when the first dust clouds of the invaders will appear. You sense it in the hurried repairs on old fortifications, in the whispered stories of past defeats, and in the hush that falls whenever someone mentions Kublai Khan's name. Yet fragility does not mean collapse. It means tension, readiness, the delicate balance of a tightrope walker. And you, floating through this moment centuries later, realize that this fragility is exactly what gives the story its quiet suspense. The kingdom might break, but it might also bend and survive. Before you drift towards sleep, let yourself chuckle once. Someone in the court likely yawned during these grave debates. Imagine the scandal of it. Generals discussing life and death, and one poor official just losing to the weight of a long afternoon. You'd fit right in. The night closes over the palace, the stars veiled by haze, and the fragile kingdom rests, waiting for dawn, waiting for whatever comes when empire collides with defiance. You open your eyes to a new day, and instead of the palace's hushed corridors, you find yourself outside in the open air, beneath the bright sun. The road is packed with people streaming toward the capital. Old men shuffle with walking sticks, their beards like silver tassels. Farmers with dirt still under their fingernails walk alongside them. Merchants leave their stalls unattended for once. They are heading for one of the most remarkable gatherings in Vietnamese history, the Council of Dien Hung. And tonight you're there too, slipping into the crowd, feeling the buzz of something rare, an entire kingdom pausing to ask its elders what should be done. You squeeze through the throng until you're seated under a large wooden canopy. Around you, the air is thick with incense and anticipation. One by one, the elders of the villages are ushered forward. Some are hunched with age, others spry despite decades of harvests, but each carries the weight of a community on their shoulders. The king Trần Nhân Tông and his father Trần Than Tông preside silently, waiting. It feels almost like a festival, but with everyone forgetting to bring the drums. The question is simple and terrible. Should we fight, or should we yield? You feel it like a stone dropped into your stomach. Because on the one hand, the Mongols loom like a thunderstorm over the mountains, their armies seemingly endless. On the other, surrender would mean humiliation, tribute, and perhaps worse, loss of the kingdom's soul. The elders are asked to answer aloud, and here the scene surprises you. These aren't timid men eager to preserve their skins. With rough voices, they declare, "Better to fight." The words ripple through the gathering like a tide. Better to fight echoes again and again until it's less like a political decision and more like a chant, a heartbeat shared by hundreds. You feel goosebumps on your arms, despite the heat. Historians still argue whether this moment was as spontaneous as legend suggests. Some say it was staged, a well-choreographed display of unity to strengthen morale. Others believe the fire was genuine, that these elders, hardened by lives of toil, truly chose defiance. Either way, the effect was the same. The kingdom would not kneel. And you, sitting among them, nod as if your voice had been counted too. A quirky detail floats your way. The elders were offered betel nut and tea during the proceedings. Picture them chewing away, lips red with the juice, while also announcing their willingness to defy the largest empire on earth. It's a little like declaring war while holding a cup of green tea and a handful of trail mix. Mundane, oddly grounding, and thoroughly human. The king rises to his feet, acknowledging the chorus of voices. His expression is calm, but you sense relief behind it. He needed this. The dynasty needed this. An empire can march with spears, but a small kingdom marches with spirit, and tonight the spirit feels unbreakable. You walk back through the crowd as the gathering disperses. People are smiling, talking, slapping each other on the back as though they've just settled on planting rice early this year instead of late. But no, they've agreed to resist the Mongols, which is slightly more stressful than farming schedules. Children trail after their grandfathers, perhaps not fully understanding but absorbing the mood of defiance anyway. As dusk falls, torches flicker along the road. You pause by a group of elders resting under a banyan tree, and one chuckles, saying, "We may be old, but we can still lift a spear if needed." Another responds, "Speak for yourself. I'll cheer from the sidelines." They laugh, and so do you, because in that moment the grimness of war is softened by humor. Even in the shadow of invasion, humanity still manages to crack a joke. The decision of Dien Hung will echo through the kingdom. Messengers are already galloping off to villages, spreading the news that the elders have chosen resistance. You imagine the reactions: farmers nodding grimly, smiths sharpening blades, women storing grain, children practicing with sticks as mock spears. The whole society leans into the decision as if it had been their own personal vote. Night deepens and you linger in the quiet after the voices have faded. The canopy stands empty now, just wooden beams against the stars, A stray dog noses around for scraps, and a breeze carries the smell of earth and smoke. You realize you've just witnessed one of history's strangest yet most stirring town hall meetings. Unlike modern politics, this one ended with rare consensus. An entire people standing shoulder to shoulder against impossible odds. But you also sense fragility. A chant of better to fight is powerful, yes, but chants alone won't stop horse archers or siege towers. The elders have lit the flame. Now the soldiers, peasants and monks will need to carry it forward. And somewhere beyond the mountains, the Mongols are already marching, completely unaware that their intended victims just voted unanimously not to cooperate. As you return to your imagined blanket, drifting between wakefulness and sleep, you can almost hear those voices echo still, rough, determined, insistent. A chorus that chose pride over safety, resistance over fear. Better to fight, they said. And in the hush of the night, their words still feel like a lullaby, fierce and strangely soothing. You shift forward with the story, following a man whose name has already slipped through the council hall whispers and landed firmly in your imagination. Trần Hưng Đạo. Titles come and go in history, but his is one you can almost hear pronounced with both reverence and a bit of awe. Commander, strategist, and to many, the steady heartbeat of the Trần dynasty. He isn't sitting on a throne. Instead, you picture him in a quieter chamber, surrounded by scrolls, ink and wooden trays stacked with maps. His hair is streaked with grey, his armour polished but resting against the wall. He writes by lamplight, brush scratching softly on parchment. You lean closer and catch words that sound both inspiring and intimidating. He writes about loyalty to the nation, about sacrifice, about the inevitability of hardship. These are not gentle bedtime words, but they become oddly soothing when you realize how much they anchor the people who read them. One of his most famous pieces, later remembered as the Hich Tung Si, is essentially a motivational speech disguised as literature. He chastises soldiers who think more of comfort than duty, painting vivid comparisons. How could a man lounge in soft beds while enemies trample the homeland? You almost wince, as though he's calling you out personally for your current position, lying down, pillow tucked, enjoying a bedtime story. Well, guilty as charged. Yet even in these strict exhortations, there's a tenderness. Trần Hưng Đạo doesn't just berate, he guides, he fathers. He knows morale is as crucial as weapons, and he crafts words to ignite hearts. Historians still argue whether his words were read widely in his own time or circulated more later, polished by scribes and storytellers. But either way, you can feel the echo of a general who understood psychology as much as strategy. Quirky detail time. Some later accounts claim that he kept medicinal herbs close at hand, both for himself and his troops. He wasn't just commanding armies, he was handing out remedies for stomach aches and fevers. Imagine Napoleon showing up with cough syrup or Caesar with a pocketful of cough drops. The image is almost too domestic to fit the stereotype of a fierce warlord. Yet it makes him feel more human, someone who understood that sick soldiers don't win battles. You walk with him outside now, into a courtyard where young warriors practice with spears. Their shouts pierce the night, rhythmic and strong. He watches them, his expression a blend of pride and relentless scrutiny. Every thrust matters, every stance matters. You realize he isn't simply preparing to repel an invasion, he's trying to build an unbreakable will, brick by brick, spear thrust by spear thrust. And while he shapes his army, whispers of his personal life trail behind him. Stories say he carried complicated feelings toward the throne, having once been overlooked for royal succession. Instead of rebellion, he chose loyalty, a loyalty so strong it's almost legendary. Some historians wonder if his loyalty was partly pragmatic. Better to be the kingdom's indispensable general than a failed rival king. Others argue it was genuine patriotism, rare and refreshing in any age. You, drifting alongside, just note how complicated people always are, even those later carved into statues. The night deepens, and you see him return to his writing desk. He dips the brush again, finishing a scroll meant not for kings, but for the common soldier. His hand is steady, the ink dark. He writes of shame, of honor, of how no one should allow themselves to become a slave in their own land. The words may have hardened spines and clenched jaws, but here, centuries later, they also carry the calm of certainty. They remind you that clarity, even harsh clarity, can be comforting. Nearby, a servant brings tea. Steam curls upward, carrying the earthy scent of leaves. For a moment the general looks less like a warlord and more like a scholar, sipping slowly, eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in thought. You find yourself relaxing too, as though the seriousness of his mission paradoxically gives you permission to let go of your own small worries. And then, because history always slips in humour like a wink, imagine one of his junior officers fumbling a spear drill and falling flat in the mud. The general sighs, soldiers laugh, and the would-be warrior scrambles back up, red-faced. Even the fiercest of leaders must have chuckled sometimes, though the chronicles forgot to record it. The lamps burn low, soldiers settle, and Trần Hưng Đạo keeps writing. The brushstrokes are slow, deliberate, like a monk copying scripture. You watch the ink dry, knowing that these words carried by memory and manuscript will outlast the war itself. For now, though, they are just marks on paper, pressed in the stillness of the night. And you, following his hand with your eyes, realize you're already drifting into a calmer place, because sometimes the fiercest dedication makes the most soothing lullaby. The story drifts onward, and suddenly you're no longer standing beside scrolls and lamplight, but walking barefoot along the streets of Thang Long. The capital, normally a hive of chatter and commerce, feels eerily subdued. The city is preparing to vanish. Not literally, of course. No wizard will cast a spell to make walls dissolve, but through a strategy as old as cunning itself, leave nothing for the enemy. It begins with shutters closing early at market stalls. You pass a fishmonger, and instead of calling out for customers, he's loading his catch into baskets, covering them with woven mats, and quietly slipping away. A silk seller shakes out her cloth one last time, sighs, and rolls it tight to hide in a chest she'll bury in a courtyard. Even the blacksmith's forge, usually ringing with hammer blows, has fallen silent. Tools are packed, coals doused, and the smith leads his apprentices out of town. You turn down a familiar lane and realize the streets are emptying, house by house, family by family. Dogs bark confusedly, not sure why their humans are suddenly in such a hurry. Chickens squawk indignantly from baskets as if they didn't sign up for this evacuation. Children cling to their mothers' skirts, wide-eyed, carrying small bundles of clothing. You follow the tide, realizing you're witnessing the famous strategy later remembered as scorched earth, or, in gentler phrasing, empty city, empty fields. Historians still argue whether the Trần rulers had planned this carefully in advance, or whether it unfolded more chaotically, village by village. Either way, it worked. The Mongols would march into Thang Long expecting banquets of food, warehouses of grain, and bustling homes to occupy, only to find silence, ashes, and abandoned streets. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some sources mention that even wells were covered, filled with stones or spiked with refuse to make them unusable. Imagine the frustration of a thirsty cavalryman arriving after a long march, yanking up a bucket and finding nothing but mud and rocks. It's the medieval equivalent of opening the fridge at midnight and discovering your roommate ate everything. You keep walking until you reach the royal citadel. Guards stand solemnly, but even they are preparing to leave. Banners are lowered, supplies loaded onto carts, and officials shuffle nervously as they carry crates of documents. The palace itself, usually filled with music and ceremony, is hushed. You can almost hear the ghosts of laughter that will be absent when the Mongols arrive. And yet, it isn't only fear that fills the air. There's also a kind of grim humour. One young soldier mutters to another, "Let them have the city," See how they like sleeping with mosquitoes. They chuckle, adjusting their spears, ready to slip into the countryside where the real fight will take place. It's almost comforting to see resilience sparkle even in retreat. You step into a neighborhood temple where monks are finishing their chants before joining the exodus. They pack sacred scrolls into lacquered boxes, sling them onto ox carts and blow out the lanterns. One monk bows to the altar, murmuring, "We'll be back when the noise is gone." His voice is steady, calm, almost like a bedtime reassurance whispered to a child. As night falls, Tanglong glows faintly with scattered torches, but the air is different. Instead of the clamour of city life, you hear wheels creaking, sandals shuffling, and the soft murmur of families on the move. It's unsettling, yes, but also strangely soothing. The rhythm of people leaving together, step after step, heartbeat after heartbeat. By the riverbank, boats wait. Families climb aboard with sacks of rice, jars of pickled vegetables, chickens clucking in wicker cages. Soldiers help push the boats into the current, paddles dipping silently into black water. Lanterns flicker like fireflies, moving steadily away. You crouch low on the bank, watching as the fleet disperses into the night. Historians note that this evacuation wasn't just practical, it was psychological warfare. The Mongols thrived on shock and awe, thundering into cities, crushing defenders, and looting resources. But when they reached Tanglong this time, they would find a ghost town. No terrified crowds to intimidate, no quick supplies to seize. Just silence. And silence, sometimes, is louder than any battle cry. One last quirky image stays with you. Cats. Yes, cats. Chronicles don't bother with them, but you imagine them prowling through deserted streets, tails high, finally ruling the capital as they always suspected they should. Mongol soldiers would arrive to find feline squatters glaring at them with royal disdain. Perhaps this, more than anything, explains their eventual frustration. As you wander back through the hushed city, you realize you're walking through absence, and absence itself tells a story. Empty streets, silent fields. The strategy may look like surrender, but it is actually defiance, hidden in plain sight. The people have left nothing to be taken, and in that nothingness they've created the first victory. The night folds over Tanglong like a blanket. Crickets chirp, the river flows, and the city sleeps without people. You close your eyes with it, knowing the silence is temporary, but for now it is a lullaby of absence, a lullaby of strategy, a lullaby of hope. The silence of Tanglong lingers in your ears as you step beyond the city walls. Now, instead of empty courtyards and shuttered homes, you see a moving horizon of dust. The Mongol vanguard is arriving, their banners snapping in the wind, horses snorting clouds of steam in the humid air. You watch them march in, row after row, armored riders gleaming beneath the sun. This is the moment when an empire collides with a ghost city. At first glance, the Mongol army is terrifying. Their cavalry moves with a precision that looks choreographed, hooves beating the earth like drums in perfect rhythm. Arrows hang at the ready in lacquered quivers, and officers bark orders in sharp syllables. Behind them trudge columns of Chinese auxiliaries and supply wagons, creaking under the weight of grain, weapons, and tents. You imagine the sound. Iron wheels grinding against stone, horses whickering, men grumbling in a dozen dialects. They expect noise from the city, panic, perhaps resistance. Instead, they ride into quiet. Streets stretch before them, empty. Markets are deserted, palaces hollow, wells sealed. A commander lifts his helmet, scanning the surroundings as if someone has played a cruel prank. Soldiers murmur uneasily. You can almost hear one whisper, "Where is everyone?" Historians still argue whether the Mongols anticipated this tactic. Some suggest they believed their sheer presence would terrify the population into surrender. Others argue they knew the Vietnamese would retreat, but underestimated how thoroughly. Either way, the shock of arriving to silence unsettled even seasoned warriors. Empires don't like fighting shadows. Now the invaders settle in. They pitch tents where merchants once sold fish. Horses are tethered in courtyards, their hooves scraping against flagstones unused to such weight. Soldiers break into houses, only to find them stripped bare. No wine, no rice, no livestock, just empty jars and cold ashes in the hearths. Imagine their faces, warriors of the greatest empire on earth reduced to scavengers, poking around kitchens like frustrated raccoons. Here's a quirky tidbit. Chronicles describe how some soldiers grew desperate enough to dig up gardens, searching for hidden food. In one case, they unearthed turnips left behind, not exactly a feast for a conquering army. Picture a fearsome horse archer gnawing on a raw turnip, trying to look menacing while chewing slowly. It takes the edge off imperial intimidation. The Mongols march further into the countryside, but the villages too are empty. You follow them along dirt paths bordered by bamboo groves. Roofs sag in silence, doors hang open and fields lie fallow. The only witnesses, a buffalo chewing lazily in the distance. One soldier hurls a rock at a scarecrow, annoyed at being stared at by straw. You suppress a chuckle. Even scarecrows seem more defiant than expected. Yet the empire keeps moving. Their generals press them onward, convinced they can flush the Vietnamese out. Camps are set up in abandoned fields, and at night the flicker of thousands of campfires paints the sky orange. You stand at the edge of one such camp, listening to the mingled sounds. Men sharpening blades, others coughing from the damp air, a few singing songs of faraway homelands. But underneath it all there's a gnawing hunger. And here lies the quiet genius of the empty fields tactic. The Mongols, for all their might, depend on local supplies. They can't carry months of food for hundreds of thousands. When they conquer, they live off the land. But here, the land refuses to cooperate. You can practically feel their frustration building, like a drumbeat under the surface. Historians debate just how dire the shortages became. Some accounts suggest starvation loomed quickly. Others argue the empire had stockpiles but struggled with distribution in unfamiliar terrain. Either way, the discomfort is clear. Soldiers stumble through muddy fields, boots caked, bellies grumbling. Horses falter in the humidity, their coats slick with sweat. This is not the swift conquest they were promised. It's a slog. And yet, amidst the hardship, there's comedy too. You overhear a soldier cursing at his soaked boots after slipping in a rice paddy, while his comrade laughs until he drops his bow. Another struggles to shoo mosquitoes from his horse, slapping wildly, looking less like a warrior and more like a man in a frantic dance. Empires, it turns out, are not immune to bugs. As you drift farther from the Mongol camp, you notice shadows flitting in the trees. These aren't ghosts. They're local scouts, watching, counting, waiting. The Vietnamese are still here, just out of reach. They move silently, leaving signs only when they want to. A broken twig, a faint footprint in mud, a ripple on the river at dusk. The invaders sense they're being watched, and it unsettles them more than they admit. Night settles across the landscape. The Mongols huddle in their tents, muttering, trying to sleep through buzzing insects and the strange silence of a land that refuses to be conquered. You lie on the grass nearby, feeling the tension in the air. The empire has taken its first steps onto this soil, but already the ground beneath them feels slippery, elusive, unfriendly. You close your eyes, hearing the faint rustle of leaves as scouts retreat into the dark. The Mongols may have entered, but they have not yet begun to win. And in the stillness, you sense that perhaps they never truly will. You follow the enemy further south, where the rivers begin to snake through fields and forests like restless silver ribbons. The Mongols, impatient and growing hungrier by the day, push their columns onward. Yet instead of grand pitched battles, they encounter shadows, flickers of movement, whispers of oars, and sudden arrows loosed from nowhere. You drift alongside them, feeling the tension rise with every bend in the river. The Red River, broad and calm under the sun, becomes the stage for a new kind of war. Mongol supply rafts move sluggishly downstream, laden with crates of grain and dried meat. Soldiers peer nervously over the edges, scanning for danger. You lean in close enough to hear their muttered prayers, their horses stamping nervously on the decks. Then it begins. From the reeds, small Vietnamese boats dart out like dragonflies. Each one holds a handful of men, their paddles dipping silently, their movements practiced. They close the distance fast, launching arrows and javelins, striking like wasps. Before the Mongols can react, the boats vanish again into the greenery. Silence follows, broken only by the splash of a half-sunken crate. The soldiers curse, fumbling with bows, firing wildly at reeds swaying in the wind. You can almost hear the reeds laughing back. These are not conventional skirmishes. They are reminders. Every step, every mile, the invaders are being watched, harassed, and unsettled. Historians still argue about the exact scale of these ambushes. Were they carefully planned raids with precise objectives, or spontaneous strikes by local militias? Perhaps both. Either way, their effect was unmistakable. The Mongols began to realize that rivers in Vietnam were less highways and more minefields. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some chronicles describe villagers stretching nets or ropes across narrow waterways to trip up enemy boats. Imagine rowing confidently, only to be snagged like a fish in a trap, spilling men into the water. The Mongols, famed riders of the steppe, were not nearly as comfortable swimming. You grin at the thought of an armored warrior flailing while a barefoot fisherman paddles calmly by. You drift closer to the banks, where scouts lie hidden, whispering directions. Their faces are smeared with mud to blend with the reeds, eyes sharp as hawks. They signal when to strike, when to retreat, weaving chaos out of patience. You crouch beside them, feeling the damp earth soak your knees, listening to the heartbeat of the land itself, slow, steady, waiting. At night, the rivers carry echoes. Mongol rafts creak as they anchor midstream, afraid to hug the banks. Fires burn low, men whisper of ghosts haunting the waters. In the darkness, you hear the soft dip of paddles again, closer this time. A quick splash, a muffled shout, and another raft disappears into the current. The Mongols cannot rest. Even in sleep, they dream of ambushes. Meanwhile, the Vietnamese soldiers treat the river like an ally. They move silently with the current, listening to frogs croak and owls call as natural camouflage. You sit in one of their boats for a moment, knees tucked, heart steady. The commander whispers a joke about how even the fish seem to hate the invaders, biting at their toes whenever they wade too deep. Laughter ripples softly across the crew, a reminder that humor is as much a weapon as arrows. But the Mongols are not entirely helpless. They send patrols, burning villages they suspect of harboring fighters. They set watchmen at the sterns of their rafts, bows drawn, scanning constantly. Still, the rivers belong to the locals. No matter how many torches the invaders light, the darkness of the water swallows them whole. Historians note that these small engagements did more than inflict casualties. They drained morale. An army that must always look over its shoulder begins to doubt. And when doubt seeps into ranks, cohesion unravels. You can feel that unraveling now, in the way a Mongol officer snaps angrily at his men, in the way soldiers jump at the splash of a fish. The days blur into nights, and nights blur into anxious dawns. The rivers keep flowing, indifferent to the struggles of empires. You drift above it all, a witness to skirmishes that will never make it into grand murals, but mattered all the same. And finally, as you close your eyes, the sound of water becomes a lullaby. Oars dip, arrows whisper through reeds, and the steady current carries everything forward. You are rocked gently, as though the river itself is reminding you. Patience, persistence, and shadows can erode even the mightiest empire. The rivers fade behind you as you drift into the heart of the Mongol encampments. By now, the invaders have been in Đại Việt long enough to feel the sting of an unfamiliar enemy, hunger. Soldiers grumble louder than their stomachs, Horses paw the ground restlessly, and the great army that once looked invincible begins to resemble a tired caravan caught in someone else's joke. You step into the camp, and the smell hits you first, not roasted meat or fresh bread, but damp hay, sweat, and the faint sourness of spoiled rations. You wander through rows of tents stitched from hides and canvas. At one corner, soldiers haggle over a small bundle of rice brought in by desperate locals. The price is absurd, several silver coins for what would barely fill a bowl. A Mongol trooper shakes his head, muttering, and eventually hands over a dagger as barter. Imagine the irony. The most feared warriors on earth reduced to pawning their weapons just to eat dinner. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some accounts suggest the Mongols even sent men disguised as traders into villages, trying to trick locals into selling food. Picture it. A burly horse archer awkwardly pretending to be a friendly peddler, his accent thick, his helmet poorly hidden under a cloth cap. The villagers, of course, were not fooled. Many simply walked away, shaking their heads, or worse, led him into an ambush. Historians still argue whether the shortages were due to Vietnamese scorched earth tactics alone, or whether the Mongols bungled their logistics. Perhaps both. Either way, supplies dwindled and tempers flared. You overhear soldiers arguing over who stole dried fish from whose satchel. Another tries to chew dried leather straps, grimacing but desperate. Even the mighty steppe ponies look gaunt, ribs showing beneath their coats. You pause by a cooking fire. A pot bubbles faintly with what looks like weeds, river snails, and maybe a scrap of bone. Soldiers crouch around it, inhaling steam like it's a royal feast. One dips a ladle, slurps noisily, and sighs in contentment. You can't help but laugh softly. Hunger has a way of lowering culinary standards. Michelin stars mean nothing when you're boiling pond weeds. Beyond the camp, you see markets springing up in miniature. Locals, either brave or opportunistic, slip in to sell tiny amounts of food. Bananas, dried shrimp, jars of fermented fish sauce. The Mongols swarm them, tossing coins, arguing over handfuls of fruit. The scene looks less like an army and more like a chaotic farmer's market. Yet beneath the bustle is frustration. This is not sustainable. One evening you hear a soldier singing a mournful tune, longing for the steppe winds of his homeland. His voice is cracked, his belly empty, but the melody rises into the humid air like a plea. Around him, comrades fall silent, listening. Even empires have hearts that can break. And yet, in the midst of hardship, humour persists. A group of Mongol riders joke about opening a tavern after the war. Mongol and Sons, turnips and mosquitoes, finest in Asia. They laugh bitterly, but the laughter matters. It is the only feast they can truly afford. As you drift from tent to tent, you notice another layer of the problem, the climate. Weapons rust faster in the humidity, bowstrings slacken, and armor becomes heavy with sweat. A soldier lays his helmet aside, scratching at rashes on his neck. Another swats at mosquitoes until he trips over a rope, sending his comrades into a fit of laughter. You smile too. Sometimes history's most terrifying armies are undone not by swords but by insects. You wander toward the riverbank, where supply rafts should have arrived days ago. The watchmen mutter about missing boats, their brows furrowed. You already know why. They've been ambushed, sunk, scattered by the invisible resistance. But to the men here it feels like betrayal by fate itself. They wait, hungry, staring at the horizon, and nothing comes. By night, the campfires burn small, as if embarrassed by their weakness. Men chew slowly, trying to make meagre portions last longer. Horses whicker softly, nudging empty feed bags. And through it all, you sense the morale slipping, a slow leak in the confidence of the greatest army in the world. You close your eyes and breathe in the night air. It smells of damp earth, smoke, and quiet desperation. The Mongols may still be mighty, but their stomachs are not. And when stomachs turn hollow, even the strongest swords feel lighter, even the fiercest empires stumble. The camp quiets and you drift to sleep with them. The sound is not of triumph, but of hunger. Low murmurs, creaking bellies, and the soft rustle of rats scavenging at the edges. Oddly enough, it becomes a lullaby, the lullaby of scarcity, where silence tastes sharper than any blade. You rise into the next morning on a trail of incense smoke. The hunger of the Mongol camp still lingers behind you, but ahead there is something softer, calmer, almost glowing. The pagodas stand quiet among the bamboo groves, their curved roofs glinting in the sunlight, bells chiming gently whenever the wind stirs. You step through the worn wooden gates, sandals crunching softly on gravel, and the air feels different, lighter, like stepping into a pause between storms. Monks in saffron robes glide across the courtyards. Their heads are shaved, their faces serene, but you notice the lines of fatigue around their eyes. They have been busy, these men of prayer, not just chanting sutras, but quietly aiding the resistance. Behind the temple walls, jars of rice are stored. In side chambers, wounded soldiers lie on reed mats, their breaths shallow but steady as monks apply poultices and whisper encouragement. You kneel beside one such patient, hearing him mutter a prayer mixed with dreams of his village. It is not only food and medicine. Pagodas become way stations, safe havens where messengers rest and guerrilla fighters slip in under cover of night. Lanterns glow dimly as coded signals, drums beat softly as warnings. You imagine how many secret orders changed hands under the shadow of Buddha's gaze. Historians still argue whether the monks acted independently or with quiet royal approval. Perhaps both. Either way, their sanctuaries doubled as sanctuaries of resistance. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some accounts suggest monks even hid weapons beneath offering tables. Imagine kneeling in devotion, only to discover spears tucked neatly under the altar cloth. A Mongol scout, stepping into the pagoda, might have bowed politely without ever realizing he was a few inches away from a small arsenal. You can almost hear the monks chuckle afterward, their laughter blending with the chime of temple bells. You wander deeper, past murals of lotus flowers and celestial beings. The smell of sandalwood lingers on your clothes. A monk offers you tea, bitter, calming, brewed from leaves steeped in chipped clay pots. As you sip, he reminds you gently that everything is impermanent, even empires. His voice is slow, almost hypnotic, like a bedtime story disguised as philosophy. Night falls, and the pagoda glows with lamplight. Candles flicker across rows of statues, casting shadows that look like armies marching silently on the walls. Outside, frogs croak, and in the distance you hear the muffled tramp of Mongol boots. But here, inside the temple grounds, peace endures. Soldiers rest on mats, monks chant softly, and for a moment you could believe the war is only a rumor. Historians debate the scale of this religious involvement. Were temples central hubs of logistics, or just occasional shelters? No one can say with certainty. What is clear is that the line between sacred and strategic blurred here. To the monks, aiding the kingdom was as natural as breathing. To the soldiers, the sound of a gong could mean both prayer and warning. And humor persists, even here. A monk scolds a young novice for sneaking an extra rice ball, then sighs and hands him another anyway. Soldiers grin, shaking their heads. The scene feels almost like a family dinner, except half the family is armed with spears and bows. You laugh quietly with them, because even in shadowed times, small joys taste sweetest. You step back outside, where moonlight washes over the pagoda roofs. The bells sway in the breeze, their tones soft as lullabies. In the distance, torches flicker where Mongol patrols move, searching for enemies that are everywhere and nowhere. But here in the temple grounds, the air carries only calm, the kind that seeps into your bones. The monks return to their chants, their voices weaving into a low, continuous hum. You close your eyes, letting that hum carry you. For a few minutes you forget the hunger of armies and the clash of empires. You are simply here, in a pagoda glowing under moonlight, wrapped in prayer and peace. And as you drift, you realize that this too is part of the war, not just spears and arrows, but the quiet strength of faith, of community, of monks who offered rice, medicine, and whispers of comfort. Empires may rage outside, but within these walls the lullaby of resistance endures. You leave the calm of the pagoda and step into the mud of a battlefield forming on the banks of the Red River. The air is thick with mist, the kind that clings to your clothes and makes every breath taste like wet soil. This is Hamtu, where the shadows and whispers of guerrilla warfare finally erupt into something louder. You can feel the tension vibrating through the ground beneath your bare feet. The Mongol vanguard approaches, confident as ever. Their horsemen trot along the embankments, banners snapping, voices carrying in a dozen different tongues. Supply wagons rumble behind them, wheels sinking deep into the damp clay. They expect another quiet crossing, another easy stretch of land. Instead, they find waiting allies, Vietnamese troops alongside Cham warriors, united for once against a common foe. The enemy isn't facing villagers in the reeds anymore. It's facing an organized trap. You crouch low in the tall grass, heart pounding with the anticipation of those around you. Drums begin to beat, slow and steady like a giant heartbeat rolling across the riverbank. From the mist emerge soldiers in lacquered armor, spears bristling like a forest of steel. The Mongols hesitate. This isn't a ghost town or an empty field. It's resistance, and it's staring them right in the face. The clash begins with arrows. They slice the air, whistling like angry bees. Mongol riders loose their own in return, the sky filling with dark streaks. You duck instinctively, though you're only a phantom witness. Horses scream, men shout, and the river carries broken shafts downstream. The battle is chaos. But within that chaos, you glimpse patterns. Vietnamese commanders directing troops with flags, Cham warriors charging with curved blades, defenders striking fast, then melting back into formation. Historians still argue whether Hamtu was decisive on its own, or simply one of many turning points in this campaign. What's certain is the shock it delivered. The Mongol advance stalled here, their arrogance bruised, their ranks thrown into confusion. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some sources say local villagers set up traps using sharpened bamboo stakes buried in the mud. Picture a cavalry charge suddenly cut short by horses stumbling into hidden pits, riders flung headlong into muck. The world's most fearsome horsemen upended by gardening supplies. You can't help but smile at the image. You edge closer, watching as the tide turns. The Mongol vanguard falters, their tight formations broken. The Allied troops press harder, shouting, striking, driving them back toward the river. Smoke rises where flaming arrows have set carts ablaze, and the air grows hot acrid with burning wood and hay. You cover your mouth, coughing, your eyes watering, but the defenders fight on with renewed vigor. In the swirl of battle, humor slips through. A Cham warrior yells triumphantly after knocking a Mongol rider from his horse, then promptly trips over a discarded shield and falls face first in the mud. His comrades laugh, even as they drag him back to his feet. War is cruel, but it also insists on comedy in the strangest moments. The Mongols try to rally, but the momentum is gone. You see their commanders shouting, gesturing wildly, but their men are scattered, their supplies burning, their confidence shaken. Step by step, they retreat, leaving bodies, broken wagons, and charred debris in their wake. The defenders cheer, spears lifted high, voices echoing across the wet fields. When the fighting subsides, you walk among the survivors. Soldiers bandage wounds with strips of cloth, monks arrive with jars of salve, villagers offer bowls of rice and tea. The mood is exhausted but triumphant. For once, the Empire has been stopped head-on. The defenders breathe easier, shoulders loosening, even as they know more battles lie ahead. As twilight falls, the river reflects the glow of torches. Smoke drifts lazily into the sky, and frogs resume their croaking as if nothing happened. You sit on a rock, watching the ripples, feeling the strange peace that follows chaos. It is fragile, yes, but it is victory nonetheless. You close your eyes to the sound of water lapping against the banks, soldiers murmuring, and drums beating slowly in the distance. Tonight Hamtu sings a lullaby, not of silence this time, but of defiance, of a small kingdom proving that even empires can stumble. You linger by the riverbank as dawn spills across the water, but now you're pulled downstream to a place where the air tastes of ash and smoke. This is Chương, another bend of the great Red River, and here the Vietnamese prepare one of their most dramatic performances. You can almost hear the script. If the Mongols insist on floating their ships into the heart of the kingdom, then those ships will burn. You walk among the defenders as they coat boats with oil and pitch. The vessels look like ordinary fishing craft, their hulls patched and humble, but tonight they will be torches on water. Soldiers laugh nervously as they smear resin onto planks, joking about who will get the smokiest job. One mutters, "Better to smell like fire than smell like defeat." You chuckle softly. It's gallows humor, but it keeps their hands steady. As the sun sets, the ambush begins. Mongol ships, heavy with supplies and soldiers, drift lazily down the river. Their sails are pale in the fading light, their decks noisy with men shouting orders. They expect an easy passage, maybe a few arrows from the shore at most. Instead, the river itself prepares to rise against them. Torches flare along the banks. Suddenly, the small Vietnamese boats push off, cutting across the current like hungry sparks. Flames leap as the oil-soaked hulls are lit, and with cries of defiance, the burning craft are steered straight into the enemy fleet. The night explodes in fire. You shield your face as heat roars outward. Wooden decks crack, sails ignite, and Mongol soldiers stumble in panic, dousing flames with buckets far too small for the inferno. Arrows hiss through the smoke, some finding targets, but the chaos is already complete. A single burning boat drifts into a supply barge, and within seconds the fire spreads like gossip in a palace courtyard. Historians still argue about the exact number of ships destroyed that night. Some chronicles claim dozens, others suggest only a handful. But everyone agrees, the psychological blow was immense. The Mongols, so used to terrorizing others, suddenly found themselves trapped in a nightmare of flames. Here's a quirky tidbit. Eyewitnesses later claimed that even fish were roasted alive, floating belly up in the aftermath. Imagine Mongol soldiers, exhausted and horrified, scooping charred fish from the river just to fill their stomachs. It's tragic, yes, but the mental image borders on absurd. A floating buffet courtesy of flaming boats. From your vantage point, you see the Mongol fleet splinter. Some ships drift aimlessly, others sink with groaning timbers. Men leap into the water, armor dragging them down as they thrash. On the shore, defenders cheer, their faces glowing orange from the reflected flames. The river itself seems to roar with them, firelight shimmering across every ripple, and amidst the destruction, humor finds a foothold. A young Vietnamese fighter shouts, "Look, the Mongols finally brought us lanterns for the festival." His comrades laugh, even as they ready another flaming vessel. You laugh too, because sometimes sarcasm is the sharpest weapon of all. By midnight, the battle is over. The river drifts with embers, the charred skeletons of ships creaking as they sink. Smoke curls into the sky, blotting out the stars. On the shore, soldiers rest against tree trunks, coughing from the fumes but smiling. They know they've delivered a wound that will fester in the enemy's memory. You wander through the aftermath. Wreckage bumps softly against the bank. A helmet floats by, followed by a broken oar. The smell of burnt wood clings to your clothes. Yet there is also a sweetness in the air. Victory, fragile but real. The Mongol advance has been slowed again. This time with fire instead of silence. As dawn creeps in, the river looks calm once more. Smoke dissipates, birds return to the reeds, and fishermen slip back out with nets as if nothing happened. The water carries on, indifferent, as if battles are just another ripple in its endless current. You lie down on the damp grass, listening to the quiet lap of waves. The warmth of the previous night's flame still lingers in your mind, but it softens now, becoming almost cozy. The fire that terrified the Mongols becomes for you a lullaby, crackling, flickering, fading into dreams. The smoke from Chương drifts behind you, and now the horizon opens wide. You walk along a dirt path lined with tamarind trees, their leaves trembling in the breeze. Ahead lies Thang, the capital, still scarred by emptiness, yet ready to be reclaimed. The defenders march beside you, their armor dented, their spears scarred, but their steps lightened by victory. They have watched the Mongol fleets burn, and now they return to their city with cautious triumph. The gates loom before you. When the Mongols entered weeks earlier, they found a ghost town. Now they prepare to leave, bruised and battered, while the Vietnamese banners rise again. As you pass under the archway, you hear the scrape of boots on stone, the shuffle of soldiers pushing through rubble. Drums echo, slow and steady, carrying the rhythm of return. Inside, the streets feel alive again. Families trickle back, carrying baskets and bundles, their eyes scanning for what remains. Children tug at their mothers' sleeves, pointing excitedly at familiar doorways. Merchants open shutters tentatively, brushing dust from counters that had stood empty for weeks. The smell of cooking fires returns, faint but comforting, as if the city itself exhales. At the citadel, soldiers replant the royal banners. The dragon insignia flutters in the breeze, bright against the faded sky. Courtiers stand straighter, their robes patched but dignified. Even the king, Trần allows himself a smile as he surveys the capital. His people have endured. His city breathes again. Historians still argue whether the Mongol withdrawal from Thang was tactical or a sign of weakness. Some say it was a temporary step back to regroup. Others believe it was the first real crack in their campaign. But for the people of Đại Việt, the meaning is simple. Their home is theirs again. A quirky tidbit drifts into your mind. Accounts describe how some citizens, upon returning, found their homes occupied by goats and pigs that had wandered in during the emptiness. Imagine the surprise of walking into your kitchen and finding a very smug goat chewing on your rice jar. You grin. The goat probably thought it had won the war. You wander through the marketplace. It buzzes with cautious joy. A blacksmith hammers out bent spearheads into cooking knives. A woman sells dumplings stuffed with whatever ingredients she could scrape together. A group of children run through the square, chasing each other with sticks, pretending to be the heroes of Ham Tu and Chương. One falls dramatically, clutching his chest, before popping back up to laugh. War has seeped into their games, but so has laughter. The city still bears scars. Burnt beams lean against cracked walls. Abandoned wells stink of rot. Yet even in ruin there is resilience. You see neighbors helping neighbors, carrying stones, clearing rubble, repairing roofs with bamboo poles. The work is endless, but the rhythm is hopeful, like a song hummed under one's breath. Night falls and torches light the streets once more. Musicians gather in a courtyard, plucking strings and beating small drums. Their songs weave tales of battles already becoming legend, voices rising in celebration. You sit on a step, watching the flicker of torchlight on smiling faces, the music mingling with the sound of pots clinking in kitchens. Thang feels alive again, a lullaby written in the language of survival. Humor sneaks back too. A weary soldier jokes, "I left the city empty so the Mongols could clean my house, but they didn't even sweep." His comrades laugh, shaking their heads, sipping rice wine from cracked cups. You laugh with them, because sometimes a joke is proof that life goes on. Above, the stars shimmer through the haze. You stretch out on the warm stones of the citadel, hearing the city hum like a great heart beating once more. Banners ripple gently. The smell of incense drifts from a nearby temple, and for the first time in weeks, the capital feels like home. You close your eyes. The laughter, the music, the faint crackle of cooking fires, they blend together into a soothing rhythm. Tonight, Tanglong has been reclaimed, and in its slow heartbeat, you find yourself drifting into calm dreams. You walk out from the newly revived capital, following the trails of the retreating invaders. They stumble southward, trying to regroup, but the land seems to fold against them. Rivers refuse to feed them, forests swallow them, and villages vanish before their eyes. The mighty army that once thundered in with confidence now looks like a tired column trudging through mud. Ahead, another story waits to be written: the fall of General Toa-do. Toa-do, one of the Mongol commanders, had carved a reputation for being fierce and relentless. You imagine him tall, armored, his eyes sharp with ambition. But here in Đại the tides of fortune don't favor him. He commands a separate force pressing northward, hoping to link with the main army, but the defenders have other plans. You drift beside him as his men march, their armor clanking, their faces drawn. Supplies are low, morale lower. They pass villages where smoke rises, not from cooking fires but from torched houses left empty. Horses stagger, their ribs showing through patchy coats. Still Toa-do pushes them forward, convinced strength and will can outweigh the silence of a land that refuses to yield. The trap tightens at Tây Kết. Vietnamese forces, emboldened by recent victories, close in from multiple sides. You watch from a thicket as their formations ripple across the fields, spears glinting under the sun. Drums roll, steady and deep, like thunder announcing a storm. Toa-do rallies his men, barking orders, urging them to stand firm. His voice is iron, but you can see the cracks in his confidence. The clash is brutal. Arrows hiss, spears jab, swords ring. The ground churns with mud and blood, though you notice more slipping than striking. Armor and heavy boots are poorly suited for the sticky earth. A soldier tumbles face first into a rice paddy, cursing loudly before being dragged up by his comrades. Even in the chaos, humor sneaks through, absurd and oddly comforting. Historians still argue over the details of Toa-do's end. Some say he fought valiantly until he was surrounded, cut down in the melee. Others claim he tried to flee, only to be captured and executed. A few sources even suggest his fate became a cautionary tale embroidered with exaggeration, a story reshaped by victory. But whichever version you follow, the result is the same. The feared general fell, and his army collapsed with him. Here's a quirky tidbit. Local lore insists Toa-do's horse survived the battle, wandering for days until villagers captured it. They say the animal was treated kindly, even fed rice and bananas, becoming a minor celebrity in the region. Imagine children giggling as they patted the mane of what had once been a warhorse of empire. History's footnotes are sometimes the most heartwarming. As the dust settles, you walk among the aftermath. Vietnamese soldiers cheer, exhausted but radiant. They gather spoils, armor, weapons, banners torn from enemy standards. Some slump to the ground, gulping down water, laughing shakily with relief. The victory feels heavy, costly but undeniable. Night descends on Tây Kết. Torches flicker across the battlefield, their glow softening the scars of combat. Monks arrive again, chanting prayers for the dead, both friend and foe. The rhythm of their voices spreads like a blanket over the weary soldiers, reminding everyone that even in triumph, compassion lingers. The Mongol forces reel from the loss. Toa-do's fall shatters their cohesion, and whispers ripple through their ranks. If one commander can be defeated, maybe all can. Fear, that invisible enemy, spreads faster than arrows. You sense it in the restless shifting of soldiers at their campfires, in the way officers bark orders more harshly, as if volume alone could stitch together unraveling courage. For you, the night is quieter. You sit at the edge of the battlefield, listening to the croak of frogs and the soft lap of water against the banks. The victory hums in the background, but the sounds of nature persist as if nothing has changed. Empires clash, generals fall, yet the rice paddies still ripple with the wind. You lie back in the grass, the stars shimmering faintly above the smoke. The story has tilted further toward the defenders, and you feel it settling in your bones. Even giants stumble. The fall of Toledo is more than a battle. It is proof that an empire can bleed, and when it bleeds, it can break. You move north now, following the trail of retreating torches that flicker weakly against the dark. The Mongol army is unraveling, its supplies ruined, its commanders scattered, yet one figure looms large in this retreat. Prince Toghan, the imperial commander-in-chief, charged with bringing glory to Kublai Khan's empire. You imagine him riding at the center of his diminished force, cloak heavy with damp, his face tight with worry. The retreat is messy. Soldiers shuffle along roads slick with mud, armor clanking, bellies hollow. Horses stumble under weakened riders. The countryside feels hostile. Every shadow might hide an ambush. Every rustle of bamboo might be a scout signaling their position. You drift alongside them, hearing the muttered complaints, the weary sighs. The once mighty army looks more like a procession of ghosts. At every turn, Vietnamese forces nip at their heels. Guerrilla fighters spring from forests, unleash arrows and vanish again. Traps catch the unwary, pits lined with sharpened stakes, bridges sabotaged to collapse under weight. The Mongols press onward, but each step feels slower, heavier, as though the land itself conspires against them. Historians still argue over the precise details of Toghan's escape, but the story most often told is equal parts humiliating and darkly comic. Pursued relentlessly, unable to hold ground, the prince was forced into hiding. To avoid capture, he is said to have crawled into a bronze tube, an enormous cylinder used for transporting supplies, and was carried out of the country in secrecy. Imagine the grandson of empire, the commander of tens of thousands, reduced to riding home like cargo in a giant metal pipe. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some later storytellers embellished the tube into an iron barrel, claiming Toghan looked like a pickled cucumber in a jar. Villagers retold it with glee for generations, proof that even the mightiest could end up looking ridiculous. You smile at the thought, history's blooper reel, preserved in folklore. As you follow the retreat, the Mongols discipline frays further. Soldiers quarrel over scraps of food. Some abandon their units entirely, slipping into the forests never to be seen again. Horses collapse, their ribs jutting, left behind on the roadside. You can almost hear the Empire's pride cracking piece by piece like pottery dropped on stone. And yet, for all its comedy, the retreat is also sobering. You sense the despair of men who once believed themselves invincible. You hear their weary breaths, see the slump of their shoulders. Even empires are made of people, and people break. One evening, as the remnants of the army camp fitfully, rain pours down, soaking tents and flooding fire pits. Soldiers curse, trying to keep embers alive, but the downpour wins. You huddle under a tree, listening to the squelch of boots in mud, the shivering coughs, the hopeless laughter of men who realize they cannot even stay dry. Empires may command the world, but they cannot command the weather. By dawn, the retreat continues. The landscape grows quieter as the army thins. Fewer banners wave, fewer officers shout. The roar of invasion has faded into a trickle of survival. And somewhere within that trickle, Toghan hides inside his bronze tube, carried northward with none of the dignity he once demanded. The Vietnamese, meanwhile, press forward with renewed confidence. Scouts report the enemy's desperation, and generals prepare to seal the campaign. Villagers whisper the tale of the fleeing prince, their laughter rising like smoke. Defeat has become not only strategic, but also symbolic. The empire humiliated, its leader reduced to a punchline. You lie down beside the muddy road as the last columns vanish into the haze. The air smells of wet earth and smoke, of endings. The war is not yet officially over, but the retreat feels final, the kind of retreat from which pride cannot recover. You close your eyes, letting the image settle. A mighty commander crawling into a tube, an empire carried out like freight, and a small kingdom still standing. It is absurd, tragic, and strangely comforting, all at once. The story drifts toward its close, and you find yourself walking through the quiet paddies once more. The sky is pale, the kind of morning light that makes everything look washed clean after storms. The invasion is over. The Mongol forces, bruised and battered, have retreated northward. The kingdom exhales, like someone waking from a nightmare to realize they are still alive. You trail through the villages as people return. Doors swing open, shutters creak, and courtyards fill with the sound of brooms sweeping away weeks of dust. Farmers step into their fields again, bending to touch the soil as though greeting an old friend. Children race down paths shouting, their voices carrying farther than they have in months. It feels like the kingdom itself has stretched, yawned, and decided it can breathe again. At the royal court, banners rise proudly over the citadel. The king and his generals gather, not in panic this time, but in relief. Their gamble has worked. The scorched fields, the ambushes, the fiery boats, the endless patience. Against all odds, a small kingdom has resisted the greatest empire on earth. You can almost hear their hearts beating slower now, steadier, as though even their blood is ready to rest. Historians still argue about the long-term meaning of this victory. Was it purely a tactical success born of clever strategy, or was it also a symbol that even empires have limits? Some suggest the Mongols never truly intended to conquer permanently, only to collect tribute. Others insist the defeat marked a rare moment when the empire's ambition cracked. Whatever the interpretation, the story endures because it shows how resilience can outweigh raw power. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some chronicles mention that after the victory, villagers staged plays reenacting the Mongols' humiliations. Actors wore oversized helmets and pretended to stumble into rivers or hide in barrels, while audiences roared with laughter. Imagine bedtime theatre where history itself becomes a comedy sketch. You wander through fields now alive with activity. Women plant seedlings in straight rows, men repair dikes, and water buffalo plod lazily through the mud. Life resumes, simple and rhythmic. You sit on a rock, listening to the splash of paddles from boats on the river, the clang of a blacksmith at his forge, the faint strains of a flute carried on the breeze. The war feels far away already, a dark cloud dissolving at the edge of memory. At night the countryside glows with lanterns. Families gather, bowls of rice steaming, fish grilling over small fires. They tell stories of burning ships, of generals' bravery, of princes hiding in tubes. Children laugh, wide-eyed, their heads nodding sleepily against their mothers' shoulders. You lie nearby, listening, and realize that history itself has turned into a lullaby, passed down from voice to voice. The stars above shimmer, the rice fields ripple softly, and you feel your own breath slow. The kingdom breathes, and so do you. Word count wind down, 300 words. Now let the battles fade from your mind. Let the clash of spears, the cries on the river, and the smoke of burning ships dissolve like mist in morning light. Imagine instead the quiet paddies stretching endlessly, their green waves swaying gently under the breeze. The frogs croak, the crickets sing, and somewhere far off a temple bell tolls once, soft and hollow, then fades into silence. You breathe slower now. Each inhale is steady, cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and river water. Each exhale is long, warm, letting go of tension like sand slipping through your fingers. The voices of history soften, becoming whispers that drift into the background. Generals, kings, even emperors, all of them far away, their noise reduced to nothing more than echoes in the night. Picture yourself lying back on the warm ground at the edge of a rice field. Fireflies flicker overhead like drifting stars. The world feels safe, calm, and endlessly patient. Whatever battles you carry in your own mind, they can wait for another day. Tonight there is no fight, only rest. The Mongol drums are gone. The boats have stopped burning. The capital no longer trembles. All that remains is the rhythm of life, paddles dipping in water, a buffalo shifting in its sleep, a child's laugh carried faintly on the wind. Let those sounds cradle you now, soft and steady. Let them rock you like a boat on a gentle current. The story is finished. The kingdom has endured, and you too will endure, in dreams as calm as these rivers. Sleep well, friends, sweet dreams.